It's devlog time, so let's jump straight into number 3 in the series. I intended to finish this one up way earlier, but kept putting off from working on it in favor of just working on the game. So it's going to be quite long and will mention a lot of changes that have happened since the last devlog. Let's start with the most obvious visible changes. The goons and the player character have proper assets now. I mentioned in the previous videos that you can play without having a weapon equipped, and that holds true, but back then there were no animations for that. Now there are. The loadout menu is now pretty much finished. The overall placement of elements remained almost exactly the same, but it shows various information in a much more digestible manner. Hovering over any stat-related panel shows extra text related to the stat or the weapon itself. You can also now see your overall mobility with all the gear you've selected. I've added a visual display of nearby walls the player can climb over. This was necessary since I noticed that without an indicator like that, and without explicitly explaining it to the player, new players would not know or notice walls which can be vaulted over. Granted, not knowing that you can climb over walls is something the tutorial will take care of. Regardless, this feature helps in showing what you can climb over. Speaking of climbing over walls, I've made it so that you can simply hold down the climb key, and as long as there are climbable walls in front of you, the game will automatically switch to climbing over them, so that you don't have to time the key press for every single wall, in case you're running. Speaking of running and climbing, I've added fast climbing over low walls. It's initiated by simply moving quickly enough in the general direction of the wall and holding down the climb key. It's a lot faster than a regular low wall climb, but unlike a slow climb, it makes noise in order to not make it a direct upgrade over regular low wall climbs. I made frag grenades send shrapnel flying when they blow up, and reduced their blast damage to accommodate for this change. The overall damage output of a single frag grenade is now much higher, provided no one finds cover in time, since the shrapnel reaches much farther than a regular blast wave radius. Stuff like this makes combat playthroughs even more fun, so if you are thinking of playing through Intravenous in a combat playstyle, there you go, you've got one more reason to do so. Stun grenades now blind the player if he's not careful. It's a pretty simple effect, but looks good and does its job of preventing you from being capable of operating properly. I added the ability to go prone. Initially I was going to add crouching, but there's no good way of displaying that in a top-down game that I could think of aside from using UI elements, so I decided to make use of the vent climbing animations to add crawling instead. This opens up a lot of possibilities for stealth gameplay, especially in cases when you need to crawl under a window undetected, which was impossible previously. Ultimately, this is going to be just the thing for pure stealth playthroughs. I added the ability to talk into your microphone in order to create noise in-game and bait enemies.
A big old fucking cock in your mouth.
This is a feature I added for no reason other than to have fun, and the gameplay is not built around it, so it's entirely optional if you don't wish to use it. I like to fuck around in games, and the only other stealth game I can recall to have this feature is Splinter Cell Chaos Theory when playing in co-op mode.
Nice cock.
Basically, I thought I would give the players an extra thing to entertain themselves with.
Sexy boy.
If someone's playing and streaming the game, they can also use this feature to entertain their audience. So really, it's a win-win scenario. I gave elite enemies the ability to lay down suppressive fire. Elite enemies will only appear closer towards the end of the game, so people playing the game in a combat playstyle will have more variety towards the end of the game. In my opinion, making the game more difficult through more sophisticated AI is the best way of increasing difficulty, as opposed to just increasing the amount of damage the enemies deal. I added the ability to shoot out door locks. It's as easy as aiming at where the door handle is and shooting there until the door becomes unlocked. Basically, if a door is locked and you really need to get through to the other side, but you don't want or don't have the time to lockpick it, you can just shoot the lock out. This can be done with any weapon, but requires you to deal enough damage to the lock itself, which means that shotguns do it in one shot, and every other weapon might take a couple of shots. Even though the game is a stealth game first and foremost, I still want to make it as fun as possible to play as a shooter. Adding a small feature like this seemed to make sense for combat playstyles. I also added killzone prevention to NPC AI. Basically, even though the AI is capable of a lot of things, in the past you could just do this Now you can't, since the game identifies obvious kill zones and signals NPCs to take cover, and basically not bother with an obvious cheese area that you set up. This forces the player into getting out of his comfort zone when in combat, and almost entirely eliminates the ability to camp one spot. Of course, even this system is not foolproof, and I'm 100% positive people will find a way to work their way around it and cheese the game in some way. Regardless, it prevents camping in a lot of cases, and I'm happy that it makes the combat more challenging as a result. To let players know what's going on, NPCs will outright taunt the camping player. The combat duration in this case is set to 3 minutes, specifically to punish the player for camping. You could wait for 3 minutes, bait another guy in, kill him, and then wait another 3 minutes since the kill zone detection will kick in once again, or you could just go out and not camp. I've added directional movement as a setting to the options menu. By default, the movement is fixed, that is, pressing W moves you up relative to the screen, S moves you down, A moves you to the left, and D moves you to the right. With directional movement enabled, the movement is relative to the direction you're facing. Personally, I find directional movement to be uncomfortable, but decided to add it since I figured there would be certain folks who would opt for this movement scheme as opposed to the fixed movement that was present in the game up until now. The stick-to-wall functionality was removed. Initially, it was added as I was planning on having the highest difficulty not display enemies unless the player had a clear view of them. As I've tested the game and let others play, it became clear that such a gameplay mechanic would make the game far too difficult, so I ended up removing this functionality. In its stead, the game now binds the same key to unloading nearby weapons one by one, which is very useful, especially for those who prefer combat to stealth. I've also further optimized the shadow map rendering. The optimizations involve a lot of technical talk, which I doubt the majority watching this will find interesting, so to put it in a nutshell, the shadow map rendering received about a 10% performance boost. This might not seem like a lot, but in order to get a stable playable frame rate on laptops and other similar weak machines while maintaining the eye candy that is shadows, squeezing as much performance out as possible is a necessity. And when you add multiple improvements of 10 to 15% on top of each other, suddenly you get an overall improvement of 40 to 50% in total, which seemed like something insignificant at first. So that's it for this devlog. The script for this video was a lot longer initially, but I trimmed a lot of technical things I thought were going to be boring. I think these videos are going to slow down from this point onwards, because almost all gameplay mechanics are finished, and the biggest things left on the plate are implementation of new assets, creation of the game levels themselves, along with everything that goes into said levels, tweaks to AI, and balance stuff. None of these things are worth making long videos about, so we'll see how it goes. Thank you for watching. Until next time.